They know his name, and they recognize his face. His face is well, very well known. Any school kid, oh yeah, that's Frederick Douglass. We know who he is. But to know what he said and what he wrote is a little more missing. We have Lincoln down pretty good, but Douglass is a little bit more missing, I think, in a larger group, a larger society. I think that's a loss.
Why is that a situation? Is it like, does it relate to what we were talking about before when we were looking at the configuration of the United States as a society, where some individuals believe that they are the real Americans, every other person is irrelevant. For this reason, even though you might have made a contribution, we will deliberately ignore you. Is that why?
I think that is a part of it. I don't know all of it. A lot of it's because we don't teach history often or well. Most of my students will get a simple survey course, and they'll never have another one again. A few museums will tackle this issue and bring Douglass out. The museum is probably the more valuable component to reintroduce everybody to Douglass, as well as, what you're doing here, podcasts. Podcasts are an important new young component in public history, because more folks will see this, and they'll see it after the event. They'll be watching this several years down the road. And hopefully, when they hear something like this, they'll say, okay, what's Frederick Douglass' autobiography? Oh, there are 3 of them? Dang, let's go back and look at those. Or look at his dedication speech to the Freedmen's Monument in Washington, D.C. Some of his speeches about the Chinese Exclusion Act, where he critiques that issue. His actions as a minister, a government employee. So he is, it's a pretty wide-ranging career. But I think we have to go back to his words, and that's the missing component. We need to go back to his words, like we did Lincoln's, and go back at him again from a fresh, hundreds of years, all over 100 years later, and say, okay, Douglass spoke here then. How does that reflect us now? Now, how have we done so far? Kind of use it as a measuring guide. How have we done so far? Oh, well, maybe not too good in this area. Maybe better in another area. Douglass was very strong with this one. And he said these things in the midst of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was already starting up in the 1890s. He saw the lost cause myth being built, where the Confederacy was rewriting their own history to write slavery out of the entire Civil War package. And so Douglass needs to be brought back for that reason as well, because he does not, he is very critical of that particular component. He wanted us to remember what that war was fought over, because that also goes back to what he talked about throughout his young life. That this is indeed, the cause of the war. Slavery is indeed this piece. And that legacy of slavery carried through. It didn't go away. It didn't just because the system died down doesn't mean the patterns, the behaviors, the prejudices died down as well.
Perhaps it had been reformed. People always look for a way to reform the situation. The criminals also have a way of reforming their crime. So you don't look at it as a crime anymore. It becomes normal to you. Only that the person who is suffering from the crime know that this is something that is hurting me. But if his point of view is not the one we are interested to hear, we will never know that it is painful. We will always see the rebranded criminality that have become a way of life.
Yeah.
Where it hurts. Anyway, what would you say was the biggest challenge, or some of the biggest challenges of Frederick Douglass as he tried to find his way around in the society?
Well, in his early years, think about this. Abolition is illegal. If you escape slavery, you have been enslaved. You are charged with theft. Remember, you do not own the body you live in. It is not yours. It is its master's. Therefore, when you leave, you are stealing. Grand theft person, So Grand Theft Auto, this is Grand Theft Person. That means you are criminally wanted. The North is no less racist than the South. Personally, you have the same personal prejudices. Irish immigrants in New York despise African American neighborhoods. Absolutely hate them. There is no great love lost there. If only they could have merged because they could solve some of their same problems together. Being being an underclasses. Why don't we bond together and vote as a block? Come up. No, that was not possible. So, if you are a person who has escaped, you know that at any time there might be a posse sent up from places long you try to forget. And if you were an escaped slave, it means you have been abused at one time or the other. You have been treated. You've seen violence. Now, even Ona Judge, who was Washington's slave when she escaped, now she was treated surprisingly well, but she knew that very shortly she would be sent to another family who didn't treat people well. And that made the panic, that made the thing, okay, either you do or don't now, And she decided, I'm jumping ship. And she was poor her whole life, but it's her life. So, but you have to get that point of saying it's worth the tremendous risk of being caught. And if you're caught, you will be tortured. You will be maimed. You may likely be killed just out of spite. Anybody around you could be killed. So that your life is you're a felon on the run, and you know that any white person around you could turn you in, and so you become insular. You're with your own communities. They will guard you. They will hide you, and if need be, send you on to Canada, the land of the free and home of the brave. In fact, there was a great letter by an African American family, escaped, went to Michigan, went to Canada, wrote a letter back to his master, telling how things were in Ontario. He ended the letter with, "God save Queen Victoria." This land of the free and home of the brave. So that's the person. Douglass has to deal with this. So from his escape as a teenager, through his working on board ship, any labor work he's done, even after he meets Garrison in 1839, all through the 1840s, even going to England, he knows he's wanted. Not until that group from England decides they get the money together and they kind of force, basically, it's kind of a bit of paying the blackmail off. They buy his freedom and get his official papers that he's free. Can he go back? Can he travel the United States? But he can never go south. He can't go back to Maryland until well after the Civil War. And when he goes there, it's kind of this, he has to exercise the demons from his own past by going back to the plantation where he grew up. A place of cruelty. It's like me going back to grade school, a place of cruelty and horror, I had a bad grade school. Not that bad, but he had to go back to places that he hated in order to kind of, so that's an interesting way of living your life. He's going back to this, the work camp, the plantation, the work camp where he was, where he watched people tortured. As a little kid, he watches one beaten nearly to death. The cruelty, that horror cruelty was epic. And you live with that. So I think living with the knowledge of that cruelty is scarring.